In this week's Shoe Shine, Will Mace is looking at the flow-on effects from the Treaty of Waitangi, and specifically the suitability of post-settlement governance entities. Will, what have you found?
So this kind of came off the back of a report that I read recently from KPMG called Maui Rau, which was looking at post-settlement governance entities. A bit of a mouthful.
It is, yeah.
We'll call them PSGEs. But basically they're, when entities, iwi or Māori body corporates went to seek redress from the government said, okay, well, you need to organise yourself in this particular way. Basically like a private trust kind of structure. But it had certain criteria within it. There had to be sort of representative, so it had sort of a democratic aspect to it. And it had to be open to all people at that point who wanted to be included within that iwi's treaty settlement. So it really suited that purpose at the time, I think, and I think everybody sort of agrees with that. It was a bit of a meeting of cultures in that point. But, for some of those entities, it's been 20 years, 30 years since their PSGs were signed. And there's a little bit of debate now, a bit of discussion about what PSG 2.0 looks like, the sort of evolution of some of those structures, particularly, around some of the criteria like democratic process, for instance.
So, what does PSG 2.0 potentially look like? What sort of changes are being suggested?
Yeah, it's all very sort of theoretical at the moment, but I think some of the difficulties that some of the entities are having, or the iwi organisations, obviously we're familiar with perhaps an overarching iwi trust that has subsidiaries within it, that are commercial enterprises or what have you, holding companies, that kind of thing, that have assets. So, the assets that went into those iwi trusts, they are being employed and growing through commercial entities, but there is still this sort of overarching layer of democratic governance, which doesn't quite resemble how we would run companies, I think. Obviously, listed corporates have, boards that are elected by shareholders, but often those board members are, basically appointed by the board themselves. They go out into the community and look to fill certain skill gaps on the board, and then they come to shareholders for a bit of a rubber stamp. Obviously, there's plenty of accountability when they come to be re-elected, and there's definitely some accountability there. But the likes of iwi organisations don't really have that, and they are lacking from a bit of capability at that top level, I think, is what's coming through in some of these reports, is that it's the capability at that top level that is holding back a little bit the top layer, but also the subsidiaries and the commercial enterprises underneath. I think there's a little bit of frustration there within the commercial community within iwi that they don't quite have the understanding from the top level of the organisation.
Can the structure of these PSGEs actually be changed legally? I mean, how difficult is that to do?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one I did sort of go into this research phase to try and figure out, and haven't quite got a clear answer there. Because they are trusts, and they also have their own trust deeds, there are terms there that they can change through voting internally, again, the democratic process. Yeah. But actually, it hasn't been tested whether that would actually come back to the legislation that the settlements were signed under, obviously, the treaty legislation. But, Sasha McMeeking is an academic I spoke to out of the University of Canterbury, who's worked as an executive at Ngāi Tahu in the past and other entrepreneurial ventures. She's been writing on these kind of issues. She thinks that a lot of the changes they're talking about could be done within existing laws within the Companies Act. So she thinks that there's an interesting line in there. She said that better law won't necessarily give us the courage to create better Māori business organisations. So she thinks it's a little bit more on Māori organisations to push forward with this, and then obviously if if laws need to be changed, then that's another thing to come to.
Push the boundaries,
Yeah.
as it is. Okay. So what role do corporate advisors then have to play in all of this?
Yeah, well, I thought that's an interesting aspect of it. Obviously, this report came from KPMG. It's a really interesting report, but it is compiled essentially, if we're talking about governance entities and high level, it's a big four global consultancy firm that's pretty much, profit driven. I just found it interesting the way that KPMG and other big fours in New Zealand are, entering this debate. I suppose whether it's there is some profit motivation there, I imagine, about sort of perhaps loosening up this iwi asset base. So I don't know whether it's attention or, it's kind of semantics. Obviously there will be some mutual benefit if iwi want to have this loosening up or, change things around a little bit and create a bit more risk risk return out of iwi assets, then that's going to be beneficial for the iwi that want it, and it's also going to be beneficial for some of the consultants in town as well. So just taking a little bit of a skeptical look there, but I think overall, the people I spoke to the report author Lydia Te Kanawa at KPMG and also Sasha, like I said, and someone from Ngāti Porou as well, and they're all like really interested in the way that consultancies and global firms can help increase that capability within communities, whether they're being billed for it or they're building the capability within their people, and then they go back to their rohe and they do business, they take up roles in the iwi themselves. It's another way of building capability and capacity within the iwi itself as well.
Fascinating stuff. Will, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Hamish.